welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Today, we have a very interesting guest, a guest with an explosive bio, Michael Yon, who's been a blogger and a reporter from the front lines of various conflicts, Iraq, mainly Afghanistan, as well as various other politically charged situations from around the world. Today, we'll be speaking about an issue that has come to the forefront in some niche publications, but has been largely ignored by the mainstream media, which is the flow of Chinese migrants through Latin America, especially Panama, to US borders, how that came to pass, who is financing it, and why it's become magnified manifold since even a few months back. That issues appeared briefly, but then sort of has not been followed up upon. And Michael has been in Latin America. He's been in Panama, and he has observed the situation himself. Before we get into all that, though, I'd like to introduce you to my very mixed and international audience, and I've been looking at your bio and your past writings, and there's been a your story is crazy. You wrote a biography of an autobiography about your youth growing up and how you ended up eventually you became a reporter. How did you decide to delve into this area that brought you to all these conflict zones and despite all these life obstacles?
It's funny because I actually never call myself a reporter unless I needed to get through a checkpoint somewhere. But I'm an author and a researcher.
It's accurate to say that you report.
There's thousands of articles like New York Times and whatnot say I'm a reporter or a journalist. So I mean that's anyway. Now I grew up in Florida. I grew up in Winter Haven, Florida, which is I see in retrospect it was quite a nice place to grow up. And then I went off to the Army in the 80s. That was when President Reagan was president, and he was doing a big buildup of the U.S. Special Operations and U.S. military in general, the intelligence community, and that sort of thing. And that happened to be right when I was coming of age. And so there was this brief opportunity when young men could try out for special forces or SEALs or that sort of thing. And so, interestingly, another teenager I went to high school with, Scott Helvenston, he and I used to play on the same football team together. We used to work out together and that sort of thing. And so after high school, I went off and tried out for Green Berets, and Scott went for SEALs. And it was a very tough decision for me. I almost went SEALs, and then I decided Green Berets because that was more fit my personality on learning languages and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But Scott became the youngest Navy SEAL in history, and at 17, which some people say that's it's impossible, it's untrue, and I'm like, ceasefire, lock and clear, look it up, and it takes like 1 minute. So he was actually made it through the initial SEAL selection and all that at 17. He was a stud, and we used to work out together, and I've never seen such an athlete. And he became a sort of a champion athlete as the years went on. But and so this becomes important later. I became one of the youngest Green Berets at 19. We must have come from special water because in that part of Florida, there were a lot of people that actually went off to do things like that, like Delta Force, SEALs, Green Berets. It was just kind of weird. I didn't realize that until I went back. And so anyway, so as the years went by, this led to that, and Scott, the Iraq War broke out. I was off in India tracking down cults and studying cults and that sort of thing, and studying brainwashing techniques actually, which is the highest form of warfare, right? And cognitive warfare is much higher than the kinetics that you learn in as a young SEAL or Green Beret, right? This is where the space is right here. And so while I was off doing that, Scott he was out of the Navy at that point. I think he served 11 years, and he was off in Iraq, and he was working for Blackwater, and he was one of the contractors who was killed one day in Fallujah, and their bodies hanged off a bridge. And so Scott was killed. And then the next day, another friend that I was a Green Beret teammate with, Richard Ferguson, he was also killed on the next day. So Scott was killed on March 30th, 2004, and Richard Ferguson, my old Green Beret teammate, was killed the next day, also in Iraq, on March 31st, 2004. So I went to both of their funerals in Florida and Colorado. And in Florida, the SEALs were like, hey, you should go off to the Iraq war. And I'm like, I'm not going to the war. I mean, that's crazy. It's a war. And I mean, what good can I do, right? And then I went to Fergie's funeral in Colorado, and some of my old Green Beret friends were saying the same. You should go to the war. It's not being presented accurately in the news. But eventually, I went. So they were both killed in March, the last 2 days of March 2004, and then in April of 2004, when they had their funerals, the United States started attacking Fallujah in retribution for the murders of the Blackwater contractors, including Scott. It was a huge attack, and that caused the war to really explode, right? And I started paying closer attention. Another friend that Scott Helvenston and I used to go to high school with, Rodney Morris, he was at that time a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army in Iraq. He was a provost marshal at the 1st Infantry Division. And Rodney would call me up constantly. Hey, you got to come to Iraq. And I'm like, I'm not coming to Iraq. I love you, Rodney, but those days I'm not going to Iraq. But then as the year unfolded, I saw Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, which was the second big attack on Fallujah. And the United States and the British and others were in there just killing huge numbers of Iraqis. And I was like, this is an insurgency. This isn't just a kinetic phase anymore. The things that Rumsfeld and others were saying, like they were just dead enders. I spent a lot of time in wars already. For instance, a lot of time with the Maoists out in Nepal and their clown act stuff. And what I mean, they won though. And so I decided to go to Iraq, and I went there in December of 2004. And within a few months, I picked up millions, tens of millions of readers. I was one of the biggest bloggers in the world, actually, according to the Los Angeles Times. I think it was out of all 22 million blogs, I think they reported in their paper. I think there was like 22 million, and I was number 70 something, I think, something like that. And all I did it with was a camera like this, not this good actually, and a laptop. That was it. So I went over there with this, and the willingness to do a lot of combat. I was doing tremendous amount of combat. And actually, a New York Times would say in 2006 or so, it told New York Times, the Army told New York Times that I had done more combat than any journalist in the war. But at that point, I was just getting limbered up. So I did a tremendous amount of combat, and because that's what I would do. I would go to different areas of the war, Iraq or Afghanistan, and I would say, which unit is in the most combat that I can go with? And, I'll go out with Marines, I got with Army, I go out with the British Army as well, and others. And so I just did, and I started to understand the pulse of the war, right? I got into tremendous amount of firefights and bombings and these sorts of things. Before you knew it, Bruce Willis was contacting me, wanted to do a movie about my life, which I never did because I stayed in the wars. You can see, if you web search his name and mine, you'll see us on TV talking about those things. But I just stayed in the wars, right? And I said, actually, I don't want any actor playing me, because it should be you should be playing the commander of some of the soldiers that I'm with, right? I'm just somebody with this. I'm not the one getting my legs blown off. Well, luckily I'm not, but because I was doing the same combat they were, actually. And it's funny how many people think they know something about war correspondent, and they're like, what you need is a big lens. I'm like, you know what? What you need is to zip your mouth. What you need is a wide angle lens. If you're doing your job, you get close. You're that close all the time, right? You're right in it. That's why photographers get killed so much, and writers don't get killed quite as much. But I was doing both, and so I continued to do that, and I stayed, and I would go back and forth between Iraq and Afghanistan. And as time went on, I had the credibility because I did so much combat with so many different units and so many firefights. It was unbelievable. And I'm literally lucky to be alive about, dozens of times. And somehow I threaded the needle. But this also gave me, I was in a position to understand the pulse of the Iraq and Afghan wars. And if you just throw a dart at my old work and see how it has turned out, you'll see it's amazingly accurate, more accurate than I would have ever predicted, actually. But because I was getting the pulse of the wars, and I had studied war enough at that point in my life to know what to look for. I mean, to walk basically like an oncologist who's been treating cancer all of his life, walks into a room and like, I don't need the instruments. I can smell, I can see this patient has cancer or doesn't have cancer. You know what I mean? And that's the way, like when I went to Afghanistan in 2006, I didn't go with the army to begin with. I left Iraq. I'm sorry, I've been out in the jungle with the aliens coming through it, and I picked up a cough. Most of the people that I went with are very sick right now, actually. So I'm coughing. But anyway, the bottom line is I knew what to watch for. I knew what to listen for. I knew what to tune out. And as you get better and better at it, you know what's signal to noise, right? Tune in Tokyo, right? You want to know what is actually going on. And so so when I went to Afghanistan in 2006, it became clear that we were losing the war. Now, keep in mind, for those who remember those times, 2006, everybody knew, quote unquote, that we had won the Afghan war, but not according to me, right? Because I'm looking for specific things. Like when I would talk with intelligence officers in the British Army and US Army and then civilian intelligence, I would ask very specific questions. For instance, how are your human trends, your human intelligence? Are you getting more walk-ins now with accurate information or less? I'm not asking them what. I'm not asking anything specifically classified, of course. I'm just asking, are more people coming up and volunteering information or not? And is that information accurate? I just want to know the trends. I'm not asking you anything secret. And usually they would actually answer. Actually, in Afghanistan, they would say, our trends are actually down. And then I would go back to Iraq and back and forth. You could see in 2006, that's Afghanistan, our trends were down. And back in Iraq, our trends were up. Because I would go back and forth. I was seeing it with my eyes. And in Iraq, I would be out with the combat units and I would see people coming up and giving us intelligence like, hey, there's Al Qaeda in that building over there. How many? 6. What kind of weapons do they have, right? What's the exact location? That one with the laser? Yeah, that's it. What are they wearing? When did you last see them? What kind of weapons did they have? That sort of thing. And then we would go kill them or capture them. And the information was just flooding in because the war, that was 2000. In 2005, we were getting some information, but the war had turned against us. And then 2006 in Iraq, I'm talking about Iraq, the information started to go up. And I was seeing it with my eyes, right? And whatever the newspaper said, I was out there on the ground watching people walk up to the soldiers and give us information that we could use to prosecute the enemy, right? And so now I go back to Afghanistan, back and forth. And in Afghanistan, the trends were going down. That means the patient's dying. The patient's getting better, right? It's pretty clear. If the intelligence from the people is going up and it's accurate, you're starting to whip up on them, right? And as long as you got the wherewithal to whip them, and we did, right? So by 2007, the things that I was seeing in Iraq in August of 2007, I think it was on the Hugh Hewitt show, or it may have been Hugh Hewitt, and I said, something like this show would be online findable and somebody could check my memory and how accurate it is. But I said something like, I'll be the first to say it, maybe, that I think we're starting to win the Iraq war, right? And the thing is I was very cautious with my words. I was actually on the ground out in Afghanistan, or Iraq, when I said that. And people immediately, keep in mind, I had millions of readers at that point, right? It was huge readership. And I knew that people were going to go, doesn't he understand? This is the highest casualties we've ever had in the entire war. And he's saying, me, that we're losing the Afghan war and we're starting to win the Iraq war when the casualties are at the peak in August of 2007, right? And I'm saying we're starting to win. And I'm like, yeah, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I'm basing this on these things. One is our human is just flooding us in, right? It's just flooding into us, and it's accurate. We're smoking them. Al Qaeda and some of the others are definitely on the run. And now we're taking a lot of casualties, though. If you look at icasualties.com or .org, if it's still online, icasualties.org, it was pretty accurate, actually. And you can see August of 2007, the peak of the war on casualties for U.S. and coalition forces. And I'm sitting here saying, I think we're starting to win. Yeah, it sounded crazy, but why were we taking so many casualties when I'm sitting here, the one who does the most combat, saying we're starting to win? One, human. Two, and it was accurate. Two, why are we taking so many casualties? Because General Petraeus was in charge then, and we were doing the surge. And Petraeus was very aggressive, which was a good thing, actually. And he was going after them hard. That's why we were taking so many casualties, because we had more troops in combat, right? And not just in combat, but in contact. I mean, actual, fighting all the time. So we were taking more casualties, but we were smoking them down. I mean, we were inside their replenishment cycle. We were inside the enemy OODA loop. We were just tearing them apart. In fact, we couldn't keep up with them. They were running so fast. And then you'll see the casualties after August of 2007 dropped. And that was it. They never went back up again, right? You'll see. Just look on iCasualties.org if it's still up there, or some reputable source that has the the casualties month by month, and you'll see I actually called it at the peak of the casualties. But I had reasons for that you could never understand unless you knew what you were looking at and you were physically present. You could not nail that like I did by reading reports. I don't care if those reports came from CIA or whoever, especially not from them. You have to, a lot of their stuff comes from the news. I mean, you have to be physically on the ground, and you have to know what you're looking at. You have to be the doctor who spent a lot of time in the trenches. And a doctor who's reading reports by some amateur doctor, somebody who just made it through med school, or a nurse who's been a nurse for 6 months, which is what most of the journalists are. Hey, I'm a war correspondent now because I've been in the war for 6 months. Okay, so you've been in a lot of shootouts and took a lot of photos, but do you really understand what's going on? Because there's two different things, right? There's a difference between a lot of photos and videos and firefights and that sort of thing, and actually getting the essence of what this beast is doing, right? And that takes a subtle knowledge that takes years to develop. So, just throw the dart at any of the old stuff that I wrote, look it up, find it, and see how accurate it's turned out or inaccurate. And it has withstood the test of time. From there, I started going after two of the generals in Afghanistan in 2010-ish, 9 or 10, and that was General McChrystal and Daniel Menard, Canadian general, very famous general. Everybody thought Daniel Menard would be the equivalent of the Canadian chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Eventually, he was a French-speaking, young, handsome general, and I was like, this guy's a clown. He's incompetent. He's just he's over here playing the role, and I started attacking him, which was uncommon for me to do. I usually wasn't going after the soldiers so much, but if I did go after soldiers, it was usually generals, right? And so I started going after both of them simultaneously, right? And eventually, General Menard, actually based on my work, was reduced in rank to colonel, kicked out of the Canadian Army, and he ended up in jail in Afghanistan for something unrelated. Running guns, actually, weirdly, because he went back as a contractor, but he was relieved of command for having an affair with a corporal and a staff. And actually, I'm the one that revealed that. And the only reason I wouldn't get down to the dirt with something like that, but the reason I did was because he was losing the war. And I'm like, listen, what's that? All's fair in love and war. Frag out. I'm like, yeah. And he's having an affair with a corporal and a staff. And my lawyer called me immediately. He calls on the SAP phone. He's like, whoa, you just published that a general's having an affair with somebody on a staff. He can sue you for that. You can lose there's a Canadian general. You can say that about an American general maybe and get away with it, but you're not going to say that about a Canadian or a British or somebody like that. They'll sue you for everything you own. And I'm like, you know me, I don't toss a frag unless I know my target, right? And unless I'm dead sure. And I never revealed my sources. And which really upset my lawyer, because he's like, you've got to come off with I'm like, I know you're my lawyer and all that stuff. And the answer will remain no. So stop asking. Right. And so I never revealed sources. And eventually it came out. He was relieved of command. He wasn't relieved of command for his incompetence in the war. He was a complete clown. Right. And you had the entire Canadian press was coming after me at one point, like, oh, that guy from Florida just doesn't like French speakers. And I was like, I didn't even know he spoke French until, like 100 clown journalists told me, accused me of that. But in any case, if he speaks French and he's incompetent, then he's an incompetent French. And that made him even crazier. You got to keep in mind, in Canada, the French thing is like the white-black thing in the United States, right? It's like, you can't talk bad about French speakers. They're like a protected class. And I'm like, well, guess what? I'm from Florida, and another frag, And so I just kept going after him, and he got relieved of command eventually. And then I kept going after, you see General McChrystal was eventually fired. And you'll see that actually Rolling Stone and Michael Hastings Michael Hastings actually accused me of covering up war crimes at one point. He was another clown. He's dead now, but Hastings went after McChrystal. He wrote that article called what was it anyway? Runaway General or something. I can't remember. Anyway, but actually, it was I set the conditions in the background because McChrystal was losing the war. He was losing the war, and the soldiers, their morale was dipping, and that sort of thing. And that's why I went after those two generals, for people that are still asking questions about that occasionally. But anyway, Michael Hastings is dead. A lot of people say McChrystal killed him, and I don't think so. I've been to the tree where Michael Hastings ran into it with his car. I don't know what happened. I don't know, but he's dead. And so he was killed in Hollywood, and so of all places. And so ran into a palm tree, which is interesting because the palm tree is the symbol of the mythological symbol of the warrior, right? Resilience, that sort of thing. That's why you'll see the palm tree on some foreign flags, right? You know, they have the palm tree because it's like a symbol of strength. You can knock that thing down in a typhoon and it pops right back up like bamboo, you know? And so, and anyway, so yeah, Hastings at one point accused me of covering up war crimes because of some firefight in Afghanistan. It was just a couple of times. The thing he said that I didn't report, you know, this is another thing that kind of hit the news for a while, and it's kind of forgotten history. But you know, he said that I covered up this killing of these two Taliban because I didn't report that it happened. And I'm like, you know what? How much combat I do? A firefight in which two Taliban gets killed. That's like a bug hitting the windshield for me in Florida at nighttime in the swamp. I see so many firefights, so many artillery strikes, airstrikes, bombings, our guys killed, right? You know, picking pieces of people out of the trees and stuff, right? I mean, there are war correspondents and then there are combat correspondents. And like in every part of life, there's only a tiny percent that go full on, full bore, full special forces, war correspondent, right? And I was one of those. And so two Taliban getting killed, to me, it was like, and you know, what's for breakfast? I mean, seriously, it was an intense war when you're with all the, and I wasn't actually in that firefight. I only knew about it because the soldiers came back from it and gave me their helmet cam video. But then Hastings, being the clown that he was, accused me of covering this up. But anyway, these sorts of dramas, these little micro dramas were all over the place. It was like, what's going on here? I mean, this is like a cocktail party of clowns, right? You got anyway. So I continued with the wars, and then I went off to Thailand, where they had the sort of a coup in 2010. I was in the middle of that. It's funny. I left Afghanistan, and right when I was attacking those two generals, and then they both got fired. Well, and I was covering the conflict in Thailand, and that was very interesting. There was a lot of firefights. I got shot in the leg. Actually, it was just I think it didn't even make me bleed, but I think it was the same bullet that killed a guy in front of me. I think the bullet went through him and got me, but there was like a couple thousand casualties. I mean, it was like over 100 killed and a bunch of journalists wounded or killed. I think how many were killed? I can't remember. Maybe 6 or 8 journalists wounded or killed. I mean, it was game on. RPG hit right above my hotel room, and another one hit below. And it was downtown Bangkok. And what's weird about that is, well, like a lot of wars, you go just a few blocks away, and there's still people eating on the streets at restaurants. I love Thailand. I love Thai people. They are the palm tree. I call them bamboo, because no matter what happens, that's why they call them Teflon Thailand, because no matter, boom, you know, Thailand gets knocked down. Everybody's like, well, Thailand's finished now. And Thailand's like, no, we're not. They're like right back up again. You know, it's like, there would be these tremendous things that happen, like terrible things, and Thais would be crying and very upset, and then they would wipe away their tears, and they're like, they're not going to the psychologist, they're going back to the battleground, they're going back to taking care of their family. They're just like, okay, you know, it's over, you know, and we move on. There was this one, what was it, maybe in 2010 or 2014, I was there for both of those coups. And 2014 was similar. Both were a lot of, between both of them, I would say, if my memory's right, 3,500 casualties, of which maybe 200 killed, mostly wounded. And And then I think it may have been, anyway, it was 2010 or 14. I did so much of this stuff. I get amnesia about when what happened, but there was this firefight at I think it was 2014. There were all these venues in Thailand where the protesters would just camp out for months at a time. I would sleep on the ground with them and stuff. And our ambassador, Christy Kinney, she would not even let any of our intelligence assets go with the protest. She would not even allow them to go in there. It's totally Clownville. And the US State Department was clearly supporting the people doing the terrorism, like openly, not even hiding it. That was when I was getting a very serious clue about what's going on here. But I was out there with them constantly on the ground. And during this these different venues where they would have people singing and dancing and stuff. One night, there was a bunch of people singing and dancing, and there was a Vice crew, Vice TV. So you could find this maybe on YouTube. And a firefight broke out they're having sort of the outdoor concert. I think it was near the government house, as I recall. And the Vice crew's on the ground, and they're like, whoa, they're shooting. You can hear the shooting going on and stuff. And the music stops, the ties, the scantily clad girls who were dancing and stuff. Everybody's like, whoa, going on. And then the shooting stops. And the Vice people, you could find this on YouTube. I need to look at it again to refresh my memory. But the journalist, she was like, scared. It was in her voice. And naturally, of course, if you've never been in a firefight, it can be kind of exciting, And she's like, then the music started again. And then people started dancing again. And she's like, I can't believe this. We just had a shootout and they're just going back to the party. I'm like, that's why I love Thailand. They're just like not a bunch of punks. You know what I mean? They're serious. They'll cry and get upset like everybody else, but then they'll just pull it together and go back to life. And I love Thailand. And so I spent a lot of time running around out there and had an office there and that sort of thing. And but then I went off to Hong Kong, of course, in 2019 and was covering those events. And I finally got the communists kicked me out in 2020 because I was a bad boy. They took me to the airplane and closed the door. It was in the news. But a lot of people thought I was going to get disappeared in Hong Kong, and I often wondered as well. But somehow I got out, and they kicked me out. I guess I was too much trouble to bother with at that point, and then continued on with other things. So now I'm watching. We saw the pandemic, quote unquote, unfold, and I started noticing it in about December of 2019, because every day on my personal battle report, I have my own private one that nobody else sees. I have all these different alerts that come in for like H5N1 and blah, blah, blah. I've been tracking all these things for years, right? Typhus, cholera. I'm just watching different outbreaks, right? Mm-hmm. And I noticed something in Hong Kong. I was like, something's going wrong in China. And since every day, as a war correspondent, if you want to study the higher level of warfare, I'm not talking about firefights in the 25 and 18 to 25-year-old combat, kicking the doors, doing Delta Force stuff. I'm talking the higher level, the cognitive levels, the pandemic level, the energy, the migration flows and that sort of thing, more grandpa level war, right? So if you're going to study those things, it takes years. And so I always watch pandemic, because pandemic, famine, and war, they go together. PANFWAR, I call it. Pandemic, famine, war. The more you study pandemic, the more you study famine and war, you see they always go together. It's a triangle. And like two or 3 years ago, I was on an interview and I said, something about PANFWAR. And one of my readers, she was a longtime reader, she called in and she said, you always talk about PANFWAR as if you made it up. And I said, I did, because I noticed it in the more than 60 books on pandemic that I've read, and a couple dozen books on famine and hundreds on war, right? And spent years in wars. And she goes, no, it's in the Bible. I was like, you're right. It's in the Bible. It's the 4 horsemen, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, I have literally plagiarized the Bible without even thinking about it. You know what I mean? I just hope God doesn't do lawsuits, because I'm probably going to lose pretty quickly on that one. And but I think I got it from the Bible and did not actually realize it. Because when then I started going back into the Bible, looking at it, I'm like, they're talking about it all the time, and they talk about it. And our ancestors wrote better than we do, I think. They're very clear, very simple sentences, right? Whether it's something that's 100 years old or 200 or the Bible, a couple thousand or more, it's just like real crystal clear thoughts, right? Like, bang, this is it. Let's not get all complicated with commas and all this stuff. It's just like, and ye shall eat your children, right? And that sort of stuff, right? And they're crystal clear in the Bible about how pandemic and famine and war, they go together. And I just happened to, I was talking with one of my friends and associates and advisors the other day, and I said, out of all my life, I've always thought that, many times I thought, wow, I just had an original thought. And then I read old books all the time. And then I find it in some old book that was written like, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I'm like, not only did they already know it in the Bible 2,000 years ago, they said it more clearly than I do. And so we've got this advantage of time, of all these huge libraries of books. Of course, how many of them can you actually read? So you've got all these sands on the sea, but you're not going to study them all, right? But the bottom line is, there really is nothing new under the sun. And really, there is a lot of old wisdom about what's about to happen ahead of us. It's already happened. There's nothing that's happening that's new, other than now we got, electronics and stuff. You know what I mean? But we're still the same old alligator swimming around in the same pond, right? We're still the same frog on the same lily pad. Our behaviors haven't changed. Just pick up the Bible and just I've started actually, for years I rejected it because I was so into physics and chemistry. I always thought I would grow up to be a physicist, and so science is always at odds with I shouldn't say religion, but religion, and then separately the Bible. But then as I keep would say things that I thought were, wow, I finally hit on something that might be an addition to human knowledge. Somebody will say, oh, actually, that's in, it's in this part of the Bible. And okay, there it is. So, so that's what I'm getting to. Everything that we're about to go through has happened before. It's happened in places like Ukraine. It's happened in places like Russia. Like, for instance, the famines that we're clearly going to be going into. There's different sorts of famines. If you read, 10, 20 books on famines, or even 5, you'll start to notice patterns, right? And you'll start to see that there's different types of famines. That I haven't seen anybody, by the way, that studies famine per se, or pandemic per se, right? I mean, there's a lot of virologists and bacteriologists and mycologists and all that out there that study the causality and all the mathematics behind epidemiology and that sort of thing. But that's separate. Like, this curtain. If you're a chemist and you study the chemistry of this curtain burning, that's chemistry. That's like virology, right? That's the science of, okay, it releases chlorine gas or something, right? And all these other things, right? But then there's what happens when people react to a building on fire. That's different, right? That's completely unrelated to the chemistry of this. So we're getting all of our advice often from virologists or whatever about pandemic. And I'm like, well, that's like getting fire advice from a chemist. You know what I mean? What I really need to know is how do crowds behave? What I need to know is, why do people get stuck in doorways? How do people flow? Which is important to me because I've often been out in massive riots and massive protests, massive crowds doing things. And you need to understand how people flow as a survival skill, right? People flow like water. Often people around me would get trampled, and I mean bad. I mean, and like dead, right? And so, but if you understand how people flow, you can predict that flow, right? Like, I would stand behind a lamppost because the flow goes around the lamppost, right? Like if you're gonna cross a river that's kind of, it's rough enough that you might get swept away, but if you're careful, you can cross it. You use a walking stick, right? And you put the walking stick just upstream from you to break it just a little bit. And, you know what I mean? There's ways to, and it's the same when you're in huge crowds. If you understand how the dynamics of this thing, what I'm getting to with pandemic and famine is they have a certain flow to them, right? And it's beyond the food, deprivation that goes into a famine, or the virus or the bacteria or the whatever that causes the prions or whatever that causes the pandemic, right? There's this other thing which becomes the human behavior and the pandemic and famine and war, how they relate to each other, right? For instance, in all these famines that I've studied, I've noticed different types of famines, but I haven't found anybody that has like a PhD in faminology that I can call up and go fly and see in Netherlands or someplace, or go talk to somebody, in Kiev or something that studied the Holodomor and 50 other famines. You know what I mean? There's just, they just don't seem to exist. Everybody has studied their little famines or something. But what I've noticed is there are patterns in famines. First of all, there's different types of famines. There's one that I just called a light switch famine. They're the famines that just sort of, turn off and turn on, right? And it's like let's say a volcano happens, and all your cattle are suffocated or something like that, and your crops don't grow. So you can go straight in from, hey, we got plenty of food, to like the Holodomor was similar to that. But let's say the Hungerwinter of 1944 to 45 in Netherlands, when the Nazis cut off a lot of the food to the Dutch, that was like a light switch. They went from reasonably well fed. It was a war, so they were not like having cheese parties every night, but they had plenty of food, and then boom, and then the Nazis cut them off, and then we liberate them, and they had plenty of food suddenly again, right? So that was like a light switch off, light switch on. That's one type of famine. There's other types you kind of slowly go into, and it can be due to various things. It can be due to, for instance, hyperinflation in Weimar Germany caused some localized famines. And that was hyperinflation. That wasn't from lack of food. That was because people couldn't afford the food, right? And then they started stealing it, like directly from the farmers, like gleaning, criminal gleaning. But is it criminal when you're starving and your children are starving? I would argue no. They're hungry, right? And so we're all gonna do it, right? And you're not going to be like, well, I'm not going to rob that store because it's crime, and the baby's crying. So then the food stops flowing, right? So the food stops flowing because people rob the warehouses. They rob the trains and the boats, and the trucks don't flow. And so now you get into an actual famine because the farmers are being robbed, and governments always go after the farmers. And every famine that I've studied, the governments go after the farmers. They always blame the farmers. They're like, the farmers are the cause. That's what they did in Ukraine with the Holodomor, right? Stalin blamed the kulaks for, basically made them the Jews, right? And was like, you can take their farms, you can take their land, go for it, right? Moved in, did a replacement migration, right? And came in and took, right? And then they went into, and people were still writing letters to Stalin, like, if Stalin only knew that we were in such hardship, he would come and save us. The same was happening in China afterwards. As you know, Mao studied Stalin and looked up to Stalin quite a lot. I think they had some fractious interactions, but also Mao learned a lot from Stalin. And when Mao did his massive famines, people were also writing letters to Mao. If Chairman Mao only knew what we were going through, he would stop this. Mao was the one doing it. Stalin was the one doing it right in front of their eyes, but they didn't know, right? Anyway, so when it comes to famines, I haven't found anyone who literally studies just the dynamics of famine or pandemic, what and how these things interact. For instance, how is it that in every famine that I study, you end up with pandemic, with zero exception to my knowledge? And then I was saying that on that interview, 2-3 years ago, and the lady's like, you act like you discovered this. And I'm like, I thought I did because I thought I was clever. And then she's like, no, it's in the Bible. And okay, I found some reasons, I think. For instance, you always see typhus, right? Not typhoid. I see even doctors mixing up typhoid and typhus, by the way. But typhus, there's different types of typhus. There's one epidemic typhus spread by lice. And then there's marine typhus spread by fleas, like rats and mice and that sort of thing. And then there's scrub typhus, right? And then there's I'm not a virologist, so let them take that. But the bottom line is there's different types, and you'll always see typhus in every case. And that's why typhus is actually called famine fever, and typhus is called war fever, and same disease, war fever, famine fever. Lots of soldiers. Typhus is one of the ultimate diseases when it comes to killing humans. Tuberculosis too, yellow fever, which all have come right through here. But anyway, the typhus It's called war fever, famine fever, ship fever, like ships, naval fever, camp fever, like, homeless camps, war camps, whatever. That's why you see typhus breaking out sometimes in these homeless camps in places like Los Angeles, right? Epidemic typhus. Keep in mind, epidemic typhus is spread by fleas, right? And it is very deadly. It is no joke. Now, that said, landmines are very deadly too, right? But typhus, if you know what spreads it and you know how to treat it, it's like a minefield. Hey, if you step on that mine, adios, amigo. But if the minefield's marked, everybody watching this is now alerted. Study typhus, and there's no excuse for you to die of typhus. If you die of typhus, it's your own fault because you didn't study it. Because now that I've alerted you, you can definitely avoid it for sure, right? You just learn, fleas in this case, or other ways that it spreads. Just study those. It's quite easy. And then if you get typhus, it can be treated, right? As long as we have the medicines and China doesn't cut us off or collapse or whatever, because a lot of our medicines are made in China, separate subject. But the bottom line is a lot of these minefields are marked. They're clearly marked. But anyway, back to famine. So you'll always get these diseases that break out. And usually I see typhus when I'm reading a new book on famine. The first few months, hey, the famine fevers came, which another one of the famine fevers is relapsing fever. And actually, on a side note, when it comes to the lice, the British used to call lice cooties.
Mhm.
And in America, do you play the game cooties? And you grew up in America. In America, we play the game cooties. Oh, she's got cooties. He's got cooties. They're teaching the children how to avoid lice, right?
Mhm.
Because lice kills, especially in the old days. You get typhus and it's not a good day, right? And so, and you take it home and the lice spread, and and then they get everywhere, right? And interestingly, you see with the evil people that are bringing these conditions on now, you see them like, I think it's the American Pediatrics Association. I found it online last year. They're actually recommending not sending children home from school who have lice, which is that's like recommending not sending children home from school if they show up to school with a hand grenade. It's like, Jimmy has a right to bring a hand grenade to school. I would argue, no, he doesn't, right? And he doesn't have a right to bring lice to school. There's a reason why, the health departments now have been weaponized, but there's a reason why we have them. You know what I mean? It's this two-edged sword, right? And so, so typhus is one. Now, interestingly, another is tuberculosis and AIDS, right? So when let's say you've got, there's a big famine and 10 million people or 100 million people are in famine, right? Let's say a big one. Now you get a population size AIDS, right? So the whole population is weakened, right? So the immune systems of millions and millions of people are weakened. Now imagine this is setting, because it's all about conditions, right? It's not about sparks, it's about conditions. When the conditions are set, the spark will come, right? The question about what will be the spark that does such and such. I don't care about sparks. It's about conditions, right?
Mhm.
If you don't put hydrogen in the Hindenburg, the thing won't blow up, right? It won't burn up, right? Because you created the conditions by filling the Hindenburg with hydrogen. It's like, hello. It's like, and so use helium, and then the conditions are not set for a big Hindenburg fire, right? And so likewise, when it comes to so now you've set conditions by having millions of people with low immunity, and now they're eating things that they normally eat. They're traveling because the wars, pandemic, and famine, they create something called HOP, human osmotic pressure. HOP, the human osmotic pressure of HOP is the push and pull of migration, right? So you get a positive pressure when there's a famine that pushes you out. You're like, I got to go get some food. You're going to go to the negative pressure area that has the food, right? So that's your magnet drawing you in, is that food. So you're going to go through. If you have to go 100 miles, if you still got the strength to do it, or you get on a train or something, you bring the sickness from that area you came from into other areas, and it starts to spread. Or you pick the diseases up there, because often your immune system might be naive to the area that you're going to, and you're eating things you don't normally eat. You're eating birds that you don't normally eat. You're eating tree bark. You'll see in every famine people eating tree bark. Every famine that I study, people are eating things like mud, they still make mud cookies, like down in Haiti, as an example, right now today, and they have for years. I mean, they'll actually sell them, right? And so you'll always see, like pica is a disease, or let's say a condition that some pregnant women get when they start eating different types of mud because they're short on minerals when they're pregnant.
Hmm.
And it was interesting. I was in Nicaragua, or no, I was in Costa Rica at one point, and I was talking with this family from Nicaragua, and the girl, she was actually 14, pregnant from her uncle, and she's, who were like my neighbors in this little village I was staying at for a while, and she's like, oh, I was eating certain type of mud. She sometimes she like a different color mud, or she was naturally brought to that. But what I'm getting to, when you get into famine, you'll start to eat everything. That's why the Bible often, numerous times, talks about parents eating their children, mothers eating their children, often, right? And I mean, that's just the way it goes. And so you'll see how these things go together. So you get a famine going, and now you get these pandemics, and then it's like what do fires do? Fires spread. The nature of a fire is to spread if the conditions are right, and the fire will continue to grow until either the conditions change or the fuel is consumed, right? Till the mathematical tipping point is reached and more heat leaves than is created, right? And that's how pandemic and famine and war goes. It just, wars are, anybody that says they can start a war and tell you how it goes is change the channel. They're either trying to sell you something, or they're actually just not very smart. Like the Ukraine war that's going on now. As soon as that, I had hit Lithuania in advance of that. I was down in Morocco looking at some migration flows, and flew up to Lithuania, to Vilnius. Belarus was, trying to push people into Poland and Lithuania. And I was with the Lithuanians in Afghanistan for a while. I was with their army there. So I have some good contacts there. And I said, hey, what's going on? Why are they doing this? And I flew up there. I stayed for about 5 weeks, and they gave me access to the camps. And that was when I realized, wow, we could have a war kickoff here, because this is a typical war move, right?
Hmm.
And I was watching the information games unfold and that sort of thing. Always watch your enemy's information games, right? Your information wars. And I started to realize, one thing I know about wars is they never do what you think they're going to do, right? If they do, you are just. I've never seen a war go as planned, right?
Hmm.
They spread. They typically spread,
Hmm.
and they just go in these unpredictable ways. Like, wow, we didn't expect that. We didn't expect the aphids, or the locusts to come right when we were doing that thing, or the sunspots happened. There's too many variables, right? But one thing that is highly predictable is that they are highly unpredictable. And now we see what's happening in Ukraine. This is a perfect setup to set more conditions for global famine, right? Which we clearly see we're going into. One, if I were to create a war that would create an additive pressure for global famine. When I say global, it doesn't mean everybody in the world will starve, but a huge number. Clearly, we're going into that. And one thing that I would do would be, if I were the evil person wearing the black hat, I would start a war in Ukraine, right? I would do that. Because that's, in addition to location, I mean, it's
Hmm.
got the black soil. I mean, Ukraine is famous, look at the color of the flag, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's the gold and the blue, right? I mean, it's the wheat and the sky, right? I mean, Ukraine, fantastic farmland, right? And in location, of course. And so that would just be one thing I would do. Another thing I would do would be to do things like destroy Nord Stream. Now, I was at BASF last year, which is the biggest chemical plant in the world, at Ludwigshafen, Germany. I was there twice last year, before Nord Stream was blown up. And I asked somebody giving a tour in BASF, I said, what happens to, okay, let me set the table on this. The reason why I was at BASF is because natural gas is very important for creating nitrogenous fertilizers, right?
Hmm.
Nitrogenous fertilizers are vital to keep this level of population up on Earth. And the first book that described this process, called the Haber-Bosch process, now was written in 1903, or published in 1903, by a German chemist named Fritz Haber. Fritz Haber, right? Fritz Haber put in a thermodynamics book that he thought you could take the hydrogen off the natural gas and combine it with the nitrogen that we're breathing and make ammonia. make urea, make ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, which is also good for explosives. Then in 1908, he made some, but it's very difficult, right? So he was a good chemist. He's like, yeah, I could do this, and he did a little bit. But now you have to scale it up. So that's when Karl Bosch comes along, another German chemist. And at BASF at Ludwigshafen, where I was at twice last year, in roughly 1914-ish, right when the canal here in Panama opened up, they started creating nitrogenous fertilizers at BASF at Ludwigshafen, which is on the Rhine River, right? Which is another important aspect of this. So they started making those nitrogenous fertilizers, and could make explosives out of that stuff too in 1914-ish. Now they need that natural gas to create that nitrogenous fertilizers, right? Now you watch the human population after that just starts to explode. It really takes off, right? Now there's other reasons, better medicines, refrigeration, better water. There's a lot of reasons, right? So it's not just nitrogenous fertilizers. Faster ships that go faster. The Panama Canal's open. We can flow stuff. There's all kinds of things through us. There's all kinds of reasons why the population exploded, but the nitrogenous fertilizers was one, right? And so now, if you were going to create famine in the world, you would do things like, start a war in Ukraine. That would help. Blow up Nord Stream. Burn down food processing facilities. Put solar panels and windmills on prime farmland. Make it impossible for farmers to farm in Netherlands, right? In Netherlands, where I often sometimes go from Panama straight to Netherlands, right? In fact, I just got several messages today from a Dutch member of parliament that I sometimes, when I go over there, I run around with him and look at the situation over there, right? I was there in March in Netherlands. I left here, Panama, and went to Netherlands because Netherlands is Panama, where I'm at now, is vital terrain on Earth. This is one of the key pieces of exactly where I'm sitting. Canal's out my window, right? And Highway 1 is out another window, right? These are two arteries, right? But Netherlands as well. Why Netherlands? Netherlands is at the mouth of the Rotterdam Harbor in Netherlands is at the mouth of the Rhine River, right? Where BASF, by the way, is on the Rhine River. So that nitrogenous fertilizers that they make there and some other places go down the Rhine River, out Rotterdam. Now, there's been big battles fought for Rotterdam in the past, right? So Rotterdam is the biggest harbor in Europe. The second biggest is Antwerp, right? Those are the two biggest harbors in Europe, and they're both in the top 10 in the world. So think about that. So the Belt and Road, a railway that comes all the way from Shanghai, China, the Pacific, and other feeders in China goes all the way across Asia and through Europe and goes to Rotterdam, right? That's why I spend so much time in Netherlands, right? So you see that this attack on the Dutch farmers and the weaponized migration that's going into the Netherlands, it's about those harbors, right? It's about that key terrain, right? So they're flooding it in. Luxembourg's already gone. Luxembourg next door, I was there a couple of weeks last year. It's already about 50% like Africans and Asians, Pakistanis, South Asians, and that sort of thing. I mean, Luxembourg is gone. They used to be the jewel of Europe. I went there when I was in the army. It's gone with the wind, right? It's unsafe to bring your wife and children there now. In downtown Luxembourg City, actually. In other parts of Luxembourg, I'm sure it's still safe, but they won't be for long. But next door to Luxembourg and Belgium and France and Germany is Netherlands, right? So the globalists are trying to create something now called Tri-State City. Tri-State City. Tri-State City is three-state city, which will be comprised of most of Netherlands, part of Belgium, and part of Germany. It's this huge smart city that they're working on, right? And it contains Antwerp and Rotterdam harbors, the two biggest harbors in Europe, right? So that's vital terrain, those two big harbors, and this canal out my window, the Panama Canal. That's why I'm here. That's why I often leave here and go to Netherlands. There's another thing in Netherlands that's vital, Netherlands. And that's, well, including the human capital. I mean, the Dutch are quite capable people, like extraordinarily capable, but they're also easily brainwashable, like seems like everybody on Earth is. Your intelligence level and your brainwashability, I don't know. They might be inversely related, but I'm not sure. There's no vaccine against brainwashability unless you've studied it and know the martial arts that they're using on you, right? But anyway, But the Netherlands, um, those they've got a gas field there called Groningen, right? And there's been a long information war to shut Groningen. As you pump the gas out of the ground, the natural gas there that's used to make nitrogenous fertilizers and thousands of other things that humans use, like, probably parts of this case or the systems that we're working on probably actually derived from that natural gas, actually, if not directly, certainly indirectly. I would say like 99.9% chance, actually, and but the Groningen gas fields, they as you pump the gas out of the land there in Netherlands, it causes some settling and causes these micro earthquakes. Like, I think the biggest one was 3.2, if my memory is accurate. Causes these little cracks in the walls and the farmhouses and that sort of thing. So this big information war was made to, hey, they're causing earthquakes, and we're disproportionately hit by these earthquakes in Groningen, and they should shut these gas. The solution wasn't, and therefore they should just build us, really even greater homes and barns than we used to have, and the solution was shut the gas fields, right? Which is, doesn't make sense unless you're doing this other larger thing, which is create conditions for global famines and to create massive amounts of human osmotic pressure to cause massive numbers of people to repopulate Europe and other places like Japan, United States, here in Panama. Costa Rica has declared a state of emergency last week because of the migration flows through. They fly the aliens go right up the road beside me here, right up to Costa Rica. I'm constantly down there watching them come out of the jungle. In fact, I'm taking a helicopter down there Friday. I'll be down. I've got a helicopter for the entire day on Friday, and they're going to leave me out in the jungle this Friday again, watching these flows, watching this these human osmotic pressure push and pull people into the United States to destabilize us. Well, I see the same thing happening in Netherlands. I saw them attempting the same thing in Lithuania and all across Europe. I spent more than 6 years in Europe, Germany and Poland. I lived 2 years in Poland. I've been all over Europe, right? And I continue to go back to get, like, let's say, a booster shot of knowledge, right? And you'll see, which I'll never take the booster. Yeah, if that wasn't a weapon, nothing was, right? That was like a cruise. That was like a smart missile, right into people's arms, prefaced by massive information war, right? And so, yeah, now you see Europe is clearly on the ropes, and I don't think it's going to make it through this without massive bloodshed. In fact, I don't see how it could at this point. I mean, it's clearly Camp of the Saints unfolding. For those who are unfamiliar with that book, it's almost like word for word nailing what's unfolding. Camp of the Saints. It's something you should probably read when all the radicals are like, hey, you can't read this, it's racist. It's hard to find an English copy, actually. It's just been like scrubbed. It's out there. You can find it. You can find it in French. It was originally written in French in 1973, I think. But anyway, bottom line is, we're going into, remember, pandemic, famine, war, they go together. A lot of and by the way, down here in Panama City, the old Southcom, Southern Command, which was one of the regional commands that the United States had. We have like CENTCOM, Central Command, and AFRICOM and PACOM and these sorts of things. And the Southcom is the Southern Command that handles, South America, Central America, and whatnot. Their headquarters was right here in Panama City, down the road from me, right? And now, guess who's there? A lot of NGOs like the United Nations, Red Cross, all these NGOs that I see everywhere I go, that same ecosystem. Wherever you go, the IOM, the Immigration Organization, well, depending on which language, it's either IOM or OIM. Like if you go into Schiphol Airport in Netherlands, you'll see they've got on the Terminal 3, walk through the rotunda doors there, and it'll be on your left, and they're giving tickets out to migrants coming in or aliens coming in, right? And that's a funnel that funnels people right through here, actually, right? And so, but now these NGOs just down the street from me have taken over. They've got their flag up. It used to be Southcom. It used to be U.S. Southern Command. Our President Carter gave away this canal. Massive error for everybody, including Panama. Panama will lose this canal. I mean, if my paradigm is accurate, they will lose this canal eventually. Imagine little Panama here. They don't have an army to speak of. They've got center front, which is actually extremely professional, but they're not big enough or strong enough to defend Panama. I mean, the individual soldiers of center front, let's just call them soldiers because they're studs. They're very professional. I deal with them all the time. I'm out in the jungles and all that stuff. I mean, they're serious guys, but they can't defend this. They can't defend it. They don't have the tools, and there's not enough of them. And they're too vulnerable, right? Imagine little Panama. It's like a child almost with pork chops hanging around its neck amid lions and tigers, right? So it's not a matter of if one of those lions or tigers is going to get the pork chops. It's a matter of which, right? Like Hawaii or Poland. I mean, or Ukraine. You know, location. One of the problems Ukraine has always had in Poland, in Hawaii, and here is location. It's also great. It's your luck and your curse, right? It's the same, right? And so Panama's got this Panama Canal built by the United States. Well, the French started it, bankrupted France, and then we bought a lot of their materials and what was left of their failed canal, and then we actually succeeded at a huge cost, and then we gave it away. So a huge amount of world trade flows right by me out the window here. You can see the smokestacks and the ships and whatnot, and the big container ships, you know, going down the canal, and LNG and everything else, right? And it's also got the connection, Highway 1, between. I'm sorry, there's a small airfield near me. 2 helicopters go. There's a if you look at the Darien Gap, where I'm often at, I'll be down there again shortly. That is, they call it the Gap because there's a gap between Panama and Colombia that has no road for about 60 miles, about 100 kilometers. And here they call it the Tampon de la Darien, the tampon of Darien, which means, like the plug, literally. And that's what they call it in Spanish, right? And they call it that because it keeps South America out, right? But not anymore, because the IOM or the OIM, depending on your language, the UN, United States is pushing huge numbers of people, 3,000 to 4,000 per day right now. Per day, it's increasing. Last month it was 82,000, but this month the numbers, well, actually the numbers should be out soon because now we're in October. So but in August it was 82,000, and so in September, I'm going to guess it's going to be closer to 100,000 because I was down there watching. I mean, the flow is increasing month by month. You know, you get the daily little things, but it's a general increase, and it's going in. And that's why I come down here year after year, because I knew, or I suspected, if my paradigm is right, that this will be an invasion route to the United States. It'll be used to take Panama. It'll be used to take Costa Rica. Costa Ricans are always. I spent 3 months up in Costa Rica. The Costa Ricans are always like, "Oh, nothing will happen to us. We're the perfect child on the block." I'm like, "You're prime real estate. You got a pork chop hanging around your neck, and they'll take you." and they've just declared a state of emergency. Of course, next is Nicaragua, and then you're getting up into Honduras and El Salvador, and Guatemala, Belize, that area, and then Mexico, right? And all of these are on the chopping block, including the United States. And that's why you see me so much in my team, the Burning Edge team, and Vandersteel and others, we're on the borders down at Mexico, Texas, and more. I've been across that entire border. I've been up and down Mexico on the Mexican side and the U.S. side. And in fact, you saw Elon Musk was at the border this week or so. Not a coincidence, because Ann Vandersteel and I, we had our Burning Edge team at SpaceX, which is right on the Texas-Mexico border. We were just there for a couple of weeks. We were intentionally trying to spur Elon Musk to go to the border. His launch pad's like 2 miles or so from the border. Look on Google Earth. And so you'll see, after we went to the Colonia north of Houston, did numerous helicopter flights, which I arranged with the kind gentleman named Dave Cannon with his helicopter, got some congressmen up over the Colonia, Babin, and Congressman Babin, Brian Babin, and Morgan Luttrell, and had a bunch of journalists like Daily Wire. You see the big Daily Wire stories unfolding. I arranged all that. I'm the one that asked Daily Wire to come, actually. I called them up and said, hey, you need to come, right? And they came, and now it's a big, huge story. It's not a coincidence that the Colonia is now huge news, and Elon Musk was at the border. It's because our team is going and causing these things to happen. That's why I'm in Panama. That's why I go to Netherlands and Japan so much, right? To show that these are vital terrains, right? So, but the bottom line is we're in a state of war. We are in a state of war. And those who don't recognize it yet are in for a very serious wake up and a high chance of death, actually. And this will be a very deadly war, and it's going to be deadly within Europe and across Europe and the United States and Canada. Of course, Canada is basically captured at this point, and large parts of the U.S. government are as well. And you see Governor Abbott so-called Governor Abbott of Texas, Greg Abbott. He's clearly World Economic Forum. He's on their website. He's doing their bidding. You see him, fighting with, quote unquote, fighting with Biden. Obviously, Biden's a meat puppet. He's a dog king, and it's in information war. What Biden is doing is called dog king. It's an old term. It's not, almost nobody uses it anymore. It's a centuries old term. But you'll see Greg Abbott and Biden, for instance, like, hey, there's this fight. Biden's guys are cutting the wire, and Abbott's guys are laying the wire out. It's all bullshit. I mean, it's just a kayfabe fight. Kayfabe is a wrestling term that I picked up from Eric Weinstein. It's a term that wrestlers use when it's a fake fight, right? Like, hey, so I'll say, hey, we're going to do a kayfabe here, and you're like, okay, kayfabe. And then you hit me over the head with a chair, and I'll throw a table at you, and and then afterwards we go to dinner together, right? But the crowd gets all riled up. Yeah, he threw her out of the ring ropes. Oh, she hit him with a beer bottle. It's like that's what Abbott's doing with Biden. That's what a lot of these things are just. Eric Adams, the governor, or I'm sorry, the mayor of New York just announced that he's coming here to Darien, right? Just announced it, right? And the president of Panama, maybe I shouldn't say much more about this, but I'll say about Eric Adams. But Eric Adams has just announced he's going to Panama, or he's going to Darien, right? He said Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico, right? And why is he doing that? Well, I mean, there's a reason, again, why I'm here. Now, what will he actually do here? In my view, he's doing kayfabe. In my view, and kayfabe is just like, they're destroying our city, our great city. Gotham City is being destroyed by the evil Governor Abbott of Texas is shipping people up to New York. Meanwhile, the conservatives in Texas, I love Texas. I mean, I've set up operations there, but I'm telling you, if I set up operations in your hometown, you should probably be looking at real estate somewhere else, because I'm a war correspondent. I'm not going to Texas because I think it's a safe place to go. I think there's going to be Texas is a front line of a serious war unfolding, right? And Abbott is not a good guy. But you see Abbott sending those buses up to New York and Washington, wherever else he sent them to. It doesn't matter. All the details they're irrelevant. The bottom line is he sent a bunch, I think it was 13,000 or something to New York. And the conservatives, which is mostly my friends in Texas, are like, hey, yay, he's doing this. And I'm like, no, he's clowning. He's tricking you, and stop being tricked. You're making me sick. You see what he's doing? He's clearing the decks as more people coming over the border, right? He's not stopping the border. Stop providing them buses, right? You're busing them to New York, and how is that helping? Oh, we're going to teach those blue state guys. No, you're not. You're injecting the poison deeper into our heart. Oh, you're calling them poison? Yes, I am, right? I've spent more than 2/3. I've spent about 3/4 of my life outside of the United States, right? About 3/4 of my life have been out of America. Most of my adult life have been off in wars and off in other countries, in over 90 countries. And I'm not talking about airport stops. I'm talking about like 4 years in Germany, 2 years in Poland, a year in India, a year in and around China, a year in Nepal, numerous years in Thailand, and all over Asia, like 25 countries just in Asia, right? I'm constantly overseas. I'm constantly with these other cultures, and I've learned some things. One is not all fish work well in the same aquarium, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not racism. Racism and culture are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
That's those are completely separate. I mean, you've got, I mean, culture, and that's like, I'm big time culturist. If anybody ever accuses me of being a culturist, which is a word I may have made up, I don't know, because I don't have a word for this. It's somebody who definitely can be prejudiced against some cultures. I absolutely am. Some cultures are very predatory, and I don't want them around, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you let them in your neighborhood, they'll run off with your women and children straight up. They'll kill you. They'll take your home straight up. And a lot of these are coming into the United States right now, right? And some of them actually come from good cultures, but some people are dumping out their prisons, right? So we're getting that level as well, right? So so I mean, I see people coming through the Darien Gap with tattoos on their, like the teardrop or AK-47, and that sort of thing. Clear, obvious gangsters. Acting like it, tatted up like it, fighting each other, raping the women constantly in the Darien. You won't believe how many women get raped coming through there. I mean, if I'm down there in a day, I'll hear 24 women tell me about getting raped. And I mean, like they got raped yesterday, right? Or even that day, right? It is everywhere. And even the IOM or the OIM, they were handing out rape kits, right? And as I publicized that across US and Panamanian news, they stopped doing it. They were handing out condoms, male and female condoms, and here comes a helicopter, and handing out male and female condoms and like the rape pills that women take, not rape, the after action pills, abortion pills or whatever they're called, the morning after pills. They're handing those out. For so many women and children get raped that they're handing out condoms. And they're handing out male and female condoms and these abortion pills, right? I mean, that's the IOM, that's the United Nations doing that. That's American money. United States is the #1 donor. I grew up being taught and believing actually that the United States is the good guy, and we make mistakes sometimes, but ultimately we're the good guy. And now I see a lot of the things that we're doing, and I'm like, you know what? We're more like a Hindu god. I mean, we've got one face. There is no people more generous than Americans. I've never seen in all my travels around the world. There is a very good face to America that's just as good as it gets on the human side, anyway. And then there's another side that's just straight up evil, greedy. There's one side that's very generous. There's another side that's very super greedy to the point of insanity. And another type that's just the military-industrial complex gone completely insane, right? We've got all these different faces at once, and I see them playing out here in the Darien Gap. We're the ones creating these conditions for all these rapes and murders out here, and the huge number. About 2 or 3 years ago, I would say 10% of the people coming through were dying. 10%. I mean, it was a huge number. Now it's maybe 1%. But you got 3,000 or 4,000 coming through per day, right? So I don't know. Let's just argue 30 to 40 per day are dying now, right? It's a lot, right? But they're still flooding through, and this is the United States invading itself. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'll go on for hours. You gave me space, and I filled it up. But if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
I most certainly do, because what you're seeing is a lot of Western politicians and NGOs have gotten taken for a ride. We've heard all the stories about environmentalist movements being infiltrated by Russians and China pushing certain ideas and using WHO to spread, to cover up pandemic origins and propaganda. We've seen 3 years of pandemic setting conditions in place. We've seen horrible policies allowing a flow of pandemic COVID patients into the country without any sort of vetting. We've seen all of that. So on the policy end, it's been a complete disaster. But let's look at the questions we are not asking themselves. I mean, it's very obvious what we should not be doing. We should not be dispersing unvetted people, all around the country. We should not have completely open borders, and we certainly should not be destroying land for food, and we certainly should be concerned at the very least about the grain deal violations with Russia and the Nord Stream 2 and all these things. But the questions we're not asking is on a larger scale, if we zoom out of these all individual operations, how exactly is this working? How are these countries, Russia, China, various, and their various allies, how are they able to create these conditions and sell them? How are they able to present this? What is the information warfare presentation side of what they are actually doing? How is it getting done? I saw pictures of the China camp. We saw that the Chinese economy is collapsing, that there is a crackdown internally on human rights. A lot of it is not making it out into the Western press. Naturally, more people are fleeing, but they're not fleeing the way 10 years ago they would have, paid the sum of money, gotten into the country, gotten their visa, whatever. They're fleeing through this Panama Canal the way Chinese migrants would never have fled in the past. So what exactly is being done? Why is it being done that way? And why aren't we asking ourselves this question? Why are people going into these insane conditions, knowing that they're likely to be raped or die or end up in a city with no place for them?
Yeah, this is actually questions to get right to the nucleus of what's happening is what you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have been quiet and let you ask it. Just cut all of that stuff I've said before and get right to your question. You know what I mean? And that's what this is the important part that you just asked. Like in we got different ecosystems, right, of people cooperating. So we've got like the World Economic Forum, which is just one globalist ecosystem, but very powerful. And then we've got the Chinese Communist Party, which is a separate ecosystem, but they're co-sanguinated with the World Economic Forum. They are blended like salt water, right? And they, for instance, the annual meetings at Davos, the World Economic Forum has, China sends serious people there. And then there's also annual meetings in China, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see people like Bill Gates with Xi and that sort of thing. They're all blended together, right? Now, the short term and the medium term goals of the World Economic Forum and CCP. Now, there are other ecosystems. There's militant Islam, and there's this, that, and the other. There's a lot of different ecosystems, but two of the major gravitational fields are those two, and they are very tightly blended at this point. So their medium term and short term goals overlap quite a lot on the Venn diagram. For instance, destabilize the United States. Because once you take the United States, Japan can go. The idea that the domino theory is fallacy, I think, is false. I think there is some truth to that. I mean, there can be. It was misused in the Vietnam War, the idea of the domino theory, but I think that there's actually truth to it. And once you knock out somebody like the United States, it's called destruction in detail, right? You just keep picking off little. It's a warfare tactic and strategy. Take off the edges, take off this, take off that, and before you know it, you just crumble it, right? And so they're doing that with the United States, capturing little mayor, Eric Adams from New York City. He's a socialist. He's just capturing these. Anyway, so these two say blended cults. Really, World Economic Forum is a clear cult. It's become this climate cult, right? And with superstars like that girl that used to run around crazy. What's her name?
Thunberg,
Yeah, and she seems to be forgotten now. And but she was out at Davos earlier in, was it December? And she was almost like forgotten. Masako Ganaha, the famous Japanese journalist, actually, she's going with us to Darien this weekend. She is the one that tracked down Klaus Schwab, and you saw her, the Japanese, tracking him and putting the microphone in his face. You saw that viral video, and she did the same to Greta. And what was that, December, right? And something like it was cold, and Masako is actually flying in today, and she's going with us to the Darien. But Greta seems to be forgotten. She was a famous little face. They get all these these rallying points in their information war, and they get their little armies together, their information war, and now they're working Chinese Communist Party and World Economic Forum working together, intermediate goals and short-term goals, destabilize and overthrow the United States, of course, and they're succeeding at this point. And Europe, almost the thing is burning down. Poland is holding out. I always thought Polish would. I lived there for 2 years. Polish are like Ukrainians in some respect. I mean, they're especially Polish are really stubborn, and the harder you push them, the harder they get. I call that non-Newtonian. Right? It's a physics term, non-Newtonian. You hit something really hard and it gets tougher. You know what I mean? Like cornstarch and water. You can run on top of it if you fill a pool with it. The Polish are like that, and the Germans are always pushing the Polish. You have to take your fair share, and the Polish are like, no, we don't. And the harder you push, the harder we get. I'm like, Germany, you have lived next to Poland since a long time, and you still don't understand that the harder you push the Polish, the harder they get. You just don't get it. It's like the Japanese with the Koreans. They live next door to each other and still don't understand each other. And then an outsider can come in and like I lived in Poland. I loved Poland, but I never pushed them either because it's like hitting Polish people. It just doesn't work. It just got to, be polite and be professional and everything just goes smoothly. And Poland's like, no, we're not going to do it. But the bottom line is countries like Poland and Russia, they're not and they're not going to just allow everybody to come in, right? China's not going to allow everybody to come in, but the other fools, like in Netherlands, weak people in France and whatnot, they're just allowing. It's Camp of the Saints, right? United States, they're just allowing everybody to come in and move into their neighborhoods. They're going to take their homes, so that suits China's goals, right? Now, ultimately, I say China. Let's say the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. CCP and China are two different things. That's like saying the Democrats are the Americans or the Republicans are the Americans. No, they're not. That's a political party, right? And so those are political parties, and CCP is the same. It's a mono-party system, right? It's communist, and so the Chinese Communist Party. When I was in Hong Kong, the last time I was there was 7 months before they kicked me out, and the Hong Kongers would always call the you can see this video I put on my X or Twitter a few days ago, and it's got some important videos from Hong Kong that I made. I made all of those videos and photos on that video. It's pinned to the top of my X, and you can see that a sign that says the evil deeds of Chai Nazis, Chai Nazis. And so the Hong Kongers would call the Chinese Communist Party Chai Nazis. And I would ask them, why do you call them Chai Nazis, right? And I asked many, 20, 30 different Hong Kongers the same question, because I'll ask same question to different people on different days, and young, old, educated, less educated, and it was basically the same answer. Fascism is when you take government and you make like a military industrial complex. You just you blend them to the point where they're inseparable. So the industry and government are one and the same. The FDA is the government, but it's also a pharmaceutical company, right? I mean, who is the FDA in the Department of Agriculture? Are they pharma? And what's pharma? That's all part of another ecosystem, like BlackRock level, right? It just keeps going higher, right? Until you get to that stratospheric level. And so that's fascism, is when they're just the industry and business has the power of the government at its beck and call, and they're inseparable. Like Biden obviously is not the president; he's just a dog king, right? He's a meat puppet, right? And so Nazism. Nazism was fascism. I mean, little f fascism. Big F fascism, of course, was Italy, but little f is that blending of industry and government. But when the Nazis of Germany, they just took racism and added that to fascism. So fascism plus racism is described by Nazism, right? So super racist and fascist, right? That is what the Chinese Communist Party is. And what I'm about to tell you next is probably the most important thing that I'll say all day. And that is that the Chinese Communist Party, they are ultra racist, and they claim dominion over everybody with Chinese blood. This is very important about the Chinese camps here and the Chinese spreading around Europe and the United States. And I was just over in Armenia and Georgia. I mean, the country of Georgia, next to Ukraine and Russia and all that Georgia. There's Chinese everywhere now. They're spreading everywhere. Why? And there's multiple reasons. One is, let's go back. The Chinese Communist Party claims jurisdiction and dominion over everybody with Chinese genes. It doesn't matter if your family's been in Panama for 150 or 170 years, which a lot of the Cantonese speaking families here have been here that long. They're not even Mandarin speakers. Keep in mind, Chinese is not a language. Chinese is a group of languages, right? And there's Mandarin and Fujianese and, Cantonese, and they're different languages. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like the difference between like, German and Dutch, I mean, they're even more different, right? So, the bottom line is, the Chinese Communist Party claims dominion over anybody with those genes, even if you've been gone from China, which is a manufactured idea in and of itself, even if you've been gone for 450 years because your family went to Taiwan 450 or so years ago, or 400 years ago, which is when some of the original Taiwanese are believed to have gone to Taiwan, right? Or 150, 170 years ago here to Panama, right? Or the same time frame of Chinese that have gone to the United States back and helped build the railways and that sort of thing, and now created those Chinatowns and blah 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 blah. All these little I call them anthro-insulins, human islands. I see them all over the world. I see them in Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand. These Chinatowns that are more Chinese than Shanghai is. Seriously, I mean, you walk in I was just in San Francisco Chinatown again last year, and you can see it's kind of shrunken, it seems. But in any case, but Chinese Communist Party claims dominion over those. Now I'm going somewhere with that. This is important. I've gone a long way around the mountain to tell you this, and they claim that the settlers that first inhabited North America and Mexico, Central America, where I'm at now, and South America were Chinese. This is a Chinese Communist Party. They claim that those Asians that are believed to have come over or said to have come over were Chinese, right? Now, what I just said before is important. That's the basis of understanding where they're going with this. So China claims, you get what I'm saying. So they're saying
all of for the liberation, the same thing as Russia supposedly liberating all these ethnic Russian minorities around the world. China is taking it a step further, and instead of going for the actual ethnic Chinese, is claiming that anyone with that potential link to China is fair game.
Oh yeah, and that means all of North America, Mexico, Central America, and South America, they claim was inhabited, the first settlers and the Pacific Ocean Rim and all that, Hawaii. They've been doing an information in Hawaii information campaign for a long time. I've been watching it for at least 10 years. Keep in mind, I've written 3 books on information war, about the Chinese information war. Unfortunately, none are in English. They're only in Japanese language, because I've been working to wake up Japanese for a long time, right? And that's why Masako Ganaha, the famous Japanese journalist, is coming here today, and she's going out to the Darien Gap with us. Again, she's the one that hunted down Klaus Schwab and had that mic in his face, the viral video from earlier, maybe December. Anyway, but because I've been working hard to wake up the Japanese. The Japanese are on the menu, but the Japanese are naive about this, as are most Americans. And, and it's funny because I'm out with the Indians often down in the Darien Gap. I'm out with Kuna Indians. I'm out with Imbara and Hunan. Mostly I'm out with Imbara and Kuna Indians. And people will say, wow, they're taking advantage of these Indians because, they're low educated or whatever. I'm like, are they? Because, I mean, I'm out with the Kuna and the Imbara all the time, and I don't think they're not low wattage people at all. I was out with this one tribal leader last year, or maybe 2 years ago now. He's 83. I guess it was 2 years ago. We're out way in the jungle. I mean, you got to take an airplane to get out there, or a boat. I took an airplane, and then I took a boat, and I got to his village, and I'm out in his village. I've been out there a few times. I'm like, hey, how's it going? He's like, oh, so he's walking barefoot. He's super fit, man. He's 83, he's strong. Kids are climbing on him. He's like, all the kids are like, he's the village chief, so all the kids love him and stuff. And the kids are so happy out there. There's no road within 50 miles, maybe. I mean, you literally have to take an airplane and a boat to get to his village, right? And so I was out there because Chinese will go through his village, right? They'll take a boat and go through. That's why I'm there, right? And some others do as well. And so he's like, he points at me in the chest. He goes, "Don't you take that vaccine?" He said it in Spanish. I said, "No, sir, I'm not going to take it." And he goes, I'm like, we're way out in the jungle. He's telling me about the vaccine, right? And he's like, when Senefront came to my village to spread this poison, I told them to go from my village. And Cinefront, Cinefront are very professional. He was talking about the professional people that were coming out. They were just Cinefront was just escorting them. But he's like, I would not allow any of my people to be vaccinated. And there's another village nearby where a lot of I'm in that village sometimes too. On Chicago, they were vaccinated largely, and quite a few of them died. I mean, I've talked to them. It's interesting because these are very remote villages, and they're both Kuna Indians, and they're both eating the same stuff, and they're about, I don't know, 30 minutes apart by boat. Every time I go back and forth, it's about 30 minutes by sea. And one highly vaxxed and the other not. And the one not highly vaxxed, everybody's like, no, everybody's fine here. And the other one, a lot of people got sick and died. Interesting, huh? And so anyway, and it's interesting that 83-year-old, he goes, why are you doing this war in Ukraine? So it must have been less than 2 years ago because the war was already on. And I said, what are you watching TV every day or something? It's like when I was in Afghanistan out in these remote villages and people would start to tell me about French politics, with the big beard guys. I was in this one village in Afghanistan, really remote village. I said, I was just kind of joking around. I said, did you hear that Michael Jackson died? Michael Jackson had died, right? And this guy had the long beard and stuff. He goes, oh, the Michael. Yes, please tell your people that we cry, something like 1,000,000 Pashtun tears for the Michael. We shall miss the Michael. I'm like, how do you even know about Michael Jackson? He's like, of course everyone knows about Michael. Why did you, he's like, yes, we shall miss the Michael. It's funny, you go out to these remote places and you think these people don't know anything, and they do. They are paying attention. They are, and this isn't the way it used to be. And often they're happier out there. But what I'm getting to is people will say, look, they're taking advantage of these Indians because they're cutting down their jungle. And I'm like, hold on, I'm out with the Indians a lot. They're selling their jungle, and it upsets a lot of the Indians. A lot of the Indians are very upset. They're like, some of the other people in our village want to sell the trees. Well, I don't want to sell the trees. They're having the same arguments that we have, and just in a different language. It's an Imbara language or a Kuna language, right? And they're having the same arguments. And then I go over to Netherlands, and it's the Dutch people arguing about the same thing. Now that you might say, oh, the Dutch people are so sophisticated, they got all these, you're swimming in PhDs and everything else, but they fall for the same mouse traps that everybody else that Americans fall for, that Germans fall for, that Ukrainians fall for, Russians and Chinese. All when you're doing counterintelligence, there's something called MICE, right? Money, ideology, coercion, and ego, right? And everybody falls for the same mousetrap everywhere I go. And it's not just now, it's space and time. It's whether it was, 500 years ago, if you're reading old stuff, which nothing's new, and it's just written in different, usually better, and it's the same traps over and over. And I remember when I was a kid, and I would go fishing with my uncle and my grandfather, and I remember asking one time, I must have been 9 or 10. I'm like, why do the fish keep going for the same bait? We just keep fishing, and we catch another fish, and we put on a worm, and we catch another fish from the same place. Don't the other fish tell each other? And they're like, well, apparently not. And I'm like, does this hurt the fish? And they're like, maybe, but we're eating them. I'm like, yeah. And so it's like, I mean, it's the same with humans. We just keep falling for the same trap, the same mouse trap. And it's not like we're just taking advantage of the Indians. It's like they sell their stuff for trinkets, or we poison Indians with fire water in the United States before, or back when it was America and becoming the United States, giving them whiskey and that sort of stuff. Now the Chinese are, the British did that with Chinese with opium. Now the Chinese are doing that to us with fentanyl and other things. We poison each other. It's the same thing. We hit each other with the same information wars. The Indians fall for the same tricks that those PhD Dutch fall for. The Dutch are supposed to be the most sophisticated people in the world. I love Netherlands. Dutch people are awesome. And you fall for the same tricks that people fall for who've been to like 8th grade, right? Seriously. And then who've never been out of the jungle, right? It's the same traps. And the Chinese are expert at this. Now, Chinese. Preface, you wanted to talk about Chinese. The Chinese clearly want to take over all of the Americas, and they're building their global network, the Belt and Road Initiative, like the trains that go all the way across Asia. I've been to the Shanghai side, all the way to Rotterdam, right? I haven't gone across the whole trade track, but anyway, the bottom line is that's part of that. Here, Panama. So Netherlands is vital terrain, obviously, right? As is here, Panama. Panama has got this canal, which is incredibly important to the United States and to the world, right? It's a pork chop. Darien Gap, where I'm going back to shortly, where I'm always out there with the Indians, the Kuna, Imbra, especially, and that gap is being destroyed, right? It's going to be opened. For instance, I was just down there a week or so ago. They're building a bridge across the Rio Chuquenaca, for those who know what I'm talking about, the Chuquenaca River. And they're clearly going to open a road to Colombia. It's clear. I think most Panamanians have no idea what's happening, but it will be opened at this rate, right? And that makes the pork chop even bigger, right? How is Panama going to actually defend itself against all these lions and tigers, the World Economic Forum, Chinese Communist Party, every other Tom, Dick, and Harry that wants this canal and wants a piece of this road? This road goes right up through Central America, Mexico, and guess what? There's another corridor called the I-69 corridor. I was just there in Texas, crosses at McAllen by Brownsville, goes up through Houston. Remember where I was just at? I said I was just over at Houston at the Colonia, right? And I was just over at SpaceX near Brownsville, right near, you can see it where it's at on the map, next to the Mexican border. Why? I-69 corridor goes right here, right on up, right? And that corridor goes right to Detroit, where World Economic Forum has another headquarters. They want to take the Great Lakes. And I-69 corridor goes to Canada. So why am I here? Why am I in Netherlands? It's all part of that Belt and Road Initiative. These are arteries, right? Why am I at BASF, at Ludwigshafen, Germany? Anywhere you see my feet, you should probably be paying attention to, unless I'm just changing airplanes, right? Because I don't waste time. I'm not going off to Tahiti, right? Which I wish I were. But that's why you see me at places like Ishigaki Islands in Japan, or northern Japan, looking at the farms and that sort of thing. That's why you see me down by SpaceX and the I-69 corridor, or here. It's all part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's all part of the World Economic Forum and Chinese Communist Party blending together in this weaponized migration, or the weaponization of migration, whether it's Belarus pushing them into, funneling through Istanbul up to through Belarus, trying to push them into Europe, or Istanbul, sending them to Bogota, which they do every day. There's flights that go every day from Istanbul, or they go through Amsterdam as well, Schiphol, and they come right down to South America. And many of the Chinese will go to Quito, Ecuador. Many of the Africans will go to Bogota, Colombia, and then they come up through the Darien Gap, and I see them, right? And then I see them again crossing into Mexico, into the United States when I'm over on the U.S. side, right? I see the same people. And sometimes when they're crossing into the United States, if I'm in Texas or New Mexico or California, Arizona, whatever, I'll ask them, did you go to Darien? And many people are like, oh, yes, how did you get there? Oh, I came from Senegal and I flew to Brazil and I flew to, or Istanbul often, and then I went to Colombia and here. And it's all being facilitated by the same players. Remember, United Nations, IOM or OIM, Red Cross and all that, they have headquarters right down the road from me, which used to be Southcom, Southern Command headquarters. They have now taken it over. Their flag is up there, right? Their flag is up where Southcom flag used to be, right?
Why is
It's right beside the canal.
Why is the Red Cross involved in these operations?
The Red Cross is just another, part of the ecosystem. When I was in Lithuania, I told them, I said, Belarus just started pushing them, but watch what'll happen. You'll have the same ecosystem will show up to your doorstep. It'll be IOM, of course, the UN. It'll be Red Cross. It'll be Norwegian Refugee Council. It'll be HIAS. It'll be maybe Catholic Charities, maybe not, depending on that particular ecosystem. But it's the same general ecosystem that shows up to all these events, like the facilitators, right? And sometimes they have different names. They'll label them different things, like Catholic Charities. That'll get the Catholics to go, oh, it's Catholic Charities. I'm Catholic. Let me help. It's just a trick to get you to throw your money at it. Catholic Charities are huge child smugglers, which we've proven. We keep waiting for them to sue us for defamation, but they don't do it, even despite that I tell millions of people on interviews, right? And I think that they don't do it because it's kind of coming into our mousetrap. If you sue us, then we get to get you in court, and then we'll come after your documents. You'll come after ours, and
Mhm.
and we'll use this to get more publicity, right? I mean, because you'll be slapping us, try to make us not talk, and we'll be baiting the mousetrap. You know what I mean? And but they don't want to play that. Maybe they eventually will. And oftentimes, anytime you hear me make an accusation about like that, I have already discussed it with the attorneys, and I think that you never know how it's going to turn out in court. You absolutely never know. And but we think that we will win based on the facts and the demonstrable facts. But of course, this is a topsy-turvy world. It's a Stalin-esque era or a Mao-esque era, and our courts are captured in the United States as well, right? And so, you never know how they're going to play. We're going against extremely powerful people
Mhm.
and they have a huge profit incentive. And then there's some of the most dangerous things you find in these sorts of conflicts actually are not your enemy. It's often cowards in your own camp. It's
Mhm.
traitors in your own camp. Cowards and traitors. You must get rid of the cowards and traitors out of your camp. That is far more dangerous to you. They're next to you. They know more about you that can be useful to the enemy, and you just got to stay away from them.
Well, the
The
cowards
cowards in your camp.
and the traitors are the ones with the funding, as it always happens.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's just a fact. If you want, it's funny because Chinese will often say, "Oh, you write these things about Japan because you're getting funding from Japanese." I'm like, actually, if you know anything about the anthropological aspects of this, Japanese don't donate much at all. If Japanese donate, it's like $10. You know what it's like? Japanese just don't. But who does? Who throws the money around? Chinese government, Chinese
Mhm.
people paying stuff. That's where the pork chop is. If you want to make money, you side with the ones that are just in it for money, like the World Economic Forum
Mhm.
or the Chinese Communist Party, which I'm clearly going against, which can clearly get me killed. And I would say there's a very high chance that it eventually will. I mean, I'll probably end up getting killed because of what I do. I mean, it's just be realistic about it. But the bottom line is, if you don't put up a fight now, you're going to die. You're going
Mhm.
to die, or at least the life that you know is gone. You'll have to live out in the jungle somewhere and that sort of thing. And maybe marry into some remote village or something, right? I mean, seriously, I mean, because it comes down to that, and because you can see they're killing people off every day now, and a lot of the things that are unfolding now, actually, old timers talked about this stuff generations ago. Now, when some of us have talked about it only really hard for the last 10 years, or even the last 3 or 4 years, now we sound like Nostradamus. I'm like, no, there was old timers talking about. They talk about this in the Bible. I mean, this is like straight up 2,000-year-old knowledge, or it's older than that. I mean, it's Old Testament, and they already had to have known about it and passed it down for many generations for it to become cultural firmware, right? I started to look at some of those old texts like the Bible. That's like a survival manual. I mean, it's telling you what's going to unfold because it's telling you. I know how an alligator hunts. When I grew up in Florida, I used to catch gators, because my grandfather taught me how to catch them, right? So I can
Mhm.
catch gators, no problem, right? I know alligators' behavior. I know when to hunt. I know when not to waste your time. I know
Mhm.
how you're going to get your arm ripped off. You know what I mean? Because the gator will get you too, and but their behavior doesn't change. I can go right back to Florida now, and the gators will have the same behavior, and so will I. And if they ever figure out my behavior, I'm gone with the wind, right? And so, but what I'm getting to is human behavior hasn't changed. It's like the same. It is, you look at these old books. The older you can get, the better, and you'll just see, wow, really, there is nothing new under the sun. What the Chinese are trying to do is dominate the world with their genetics, right?
Mhm.
Bottom line. And the World Economic Forum, they're also very sophisticated. I think a lot of them clearly see it. Others are just, mushrooms along for the ride, like Trudeau. Trudeau's a World Economic Forum puppet, but he's actually stupid.
Mhm.
He's just a moron, right? So you've got people like him and Mark Rutte in Netherlands. Rutte's smarter than Trudeau, but he's just a boy, right? And he'll never be a man. It's impossible for Trudeau to be a man, right? Because he just can't do that. And in Japan, they call those bearded boys, right? They're boys who just never become a man. They're never willing to fight for anything. They're never willing. There's nothing that they would actually die for. They would never die for their family. They would never really fight for their family. They'll just sell out. They'll sell out for a line of coke. I'm not saying that Trudeau is a coke addict or those accusations from India are true. I have no idea, but he's clearly he's a piece of meat, and that's why he was selected, because he's a meat puppet. Actually, an old terminology, again, it's a term that's rarely used these days. It's called dog king. A dog king is, old fights between Swedish and Norwegian kings. Somebody vanquishes the other king, kills him, runs him off or whatever. He would make a dog as a king, right? An actual dog, right? And he would give it a crown and give it a throne, and this is your dog king. And the dog king has servants and people that feed it, and it gives orders, right? And it tells you, it's time to work more or whatever. It's time to, and people are like, well, the king's a dog. And like, yeah, but that's your king. And you shall do what the king says, because that is our way. And people are like, okay, and then so that demoralizes the people who are like, yeah, but the king's a dog. And it emboldens your enemies. Hey, they serve their king's a dog. We can go take their farms, right? And that's what's happening to the United States now. The Chinese are like, look at that meat puppet up in Canada. Trudeau, he's a silly boy. And the whole ecosystem of politicians in Canada, silly boys, silly children, silly girls, right? Karens. And the same in the United States, meat puppet Biden, his coke addict son, or whatever drug he does today, right? And sleeping with his brother's wife when he died, right? That sort of stuff. Just filthy people, right?
Mhm.
And then you've got people like Abbott, who plays the game in Texas. He plays it just enough because there's still a critical mass of conservatives in Texas who will rile up. So in Texas and those sorts of ecosystems, you got to play a different game. You got to tailor make this game for each ecosystem. In Texas, he's got to toe the Second Amendment and the First Amendment line. Hey, we're Texans. We have a right to own guns. We have a right to the Constitution. We'll stick to it. And so he plays the game, but he leaves the border open, right? He plays the game just enough that the conservatives will go, okay, we got enough of our drug. He's defending the Second Amendment. He's defending Texas. No, he's not. It's kayfabe, right? He's just the drug that you will accept, right? To pull the cover up over your head one more night. I just want one more nice night to sleep, that I don't have to actually fight the beast at the door. The wolf is at the door. Let me go back to Netherlands, by the way, on that Groningen gas fields. I was mentioning earlier on shutting down the the natural gas to make nitrogenous fertilizers. That information war, well, about 2.5 months ago or so now, roughly, the Dutch government said that they're closing Groningen gas fields. That's why I was there in March, warning, I think they're going to close the Groningen gas fields. And that's a big deal, right? It's all additive pressures. None of these particular things will create famine, but all of the additive pressures, they add up. I found this 1910 and 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica in a friend's home. She had an old set of encyclopedia. I went right to F, right? And I looked up famine. And I read, if you can look these up, because this encyclopedias might be online. It's just old yellow pages. I love small print. And they talked about how the big famines are probably over, because in the world, there's always enough food to go around. It's just that the people that need it are over there and the food's over here. But now we have faster ships that carry more. This was before the the Panama Canal was opened because we're talking 1910, 1911, which opened here in 1914, right? But the ships were getting bigger, they were getting faster, they were the Haber-Bosch process was not actually launched yet because we're still talking 1910, 1911, which means it was probably written about 1909-ish, and that encyclopedia. But it talked about, the trains are faster, the trains are bigger. We've actually got more roads. So big famines are probably over, right? It was very well written, but their conclusions were wrong, obviously, because now the biggest famines in human history have happened since the Haber-Bosch process has been unraveled, unleashed, or not unleashed is not the right word, but let's say unrolled, we got huge ships now. We got all kinds of ways to keep. But now we've also got the ability to interrupt these things, and the population is much bigger, right? So now you've got more people. We've had an amazing amount of resilience. If you look at the pressures that we've withstood since 2020, and still haven't gone into any major famines yet, but they're coming. You can clearly see the conditions are getting set for this. But anyway, all these meat puppets and, the Trudeaus and the children of the world that are supposed leaders, the guy's got an IQ of maybe 100. He might be at best average, but I don't think so. When I come back to the United States, by the way, again, I spend most of my time overseas. I come back to the United States and I see my country drugged up, right? I smell, I go to Washington, D.C., and I check into hotels, or I'm walking down the street and I smell marijuana, right? And I smell in the hotels and the elevators, walking down the street, Washington, Philadelphia, New York, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, everywhere I go, even Houston, right? I'm smelling dope around everywhere, smelling dope on people's clothes. When I was younger, I was like, well, just let them be. I guess I was kind of libertarian, might be the right word. I was like, I don't care as long as you don't bother me. But now I realize I was naive. It's true. As you get older and see more things, you'll become more conservative. I've become anti-marijuana. Whereas before, I just didn't care. Do what you're going to do. But now I see it as a weapon. It's as a weapon that's being used against us. And people often say, when will you get on the Joe Rogan show? I'm like, never. Because when Joe Rogan's smoking dope on his show, I'm calling him out for it. You and Elon Musk smoking dope on your show together. Millions and millions of young people are seeing that, and they're smoking that dope sitting on the couch. Well, Elon does it. He's the richest man in the world. He's getting ready to go to Mars. Elon Musk and him and Joe Rogan smoking dope on their show. I'm like, you see these men coming through the Darien Gap? Or when I'm down in Morocco or Greece watching these people go, these men got some testosterone going. These are full-on men. They're not drugged up. They'll kill your ass. They will kill you. They'll take your women, and they'll take your home. This is no joke. You're going to lay down on the couch like that meat puppet up in Canada, Trudeau, or Biden and his drug addict son. While these guys come in, these high testosterone guys, they'll kill every one of you. And the fact that you're allowing the Texas border wide open and not doing a thing about it, Arizona, New Mexico, California, all across Canada, U.S. border, coming up on the beaches of Florida, where's the men with the testosterone stopping this? Where? I'm going back out to the jungle again, and I'll be, talking, showing everybody what's going on. I tell you what, it's time. You either stand up now or you're going to die. It's that simple. Ukraine will be gone. You probably have family in Ukraine. Well, what's the United States and Europe going to do when we collapse? Right? Nothing. Ukraine is being exploited, right? And Russia's doing their thing, and the United States and NATO are everybody's exploiting Ukraine, including Ukrainians, right? Ukrainians are exploiting Ukrainians, right? I mean, I had a friend over there recently. He was talking about, he might watch the show. I won't say his name, but he was over there with some of the oligarchs, and they were just having a big drinking party in Ukraine, right? While the war is going on, at the pool, dancing girls, the whole works. You know what I mean? It's like, seriously, it's a state of war. And yet these people that are making the massive amounts of money are just having a big party, right? Now they're talking about, recruiting or drafting Ukrainian women, young women now, because so many of the men are dead or gone or living in Poland or Germany or someplace, and it's destroying Ukraine, and Ukraine is, Europe is collapsing. I mean, that's why people say, what, I had some Ukrainian friends get angry at me when they're saying, when they saw I was so against this war. I'm like, I'm looking at that. What Sun Tzu say? Know your enemy and know yourself. And I'm studying ourselves in Europe and the United States, and our self has cancer. So you're asking us to get into a prize fight with Russia and others when we have cancer and this border is wide open. We don't have a border. United States will collapse and go into revolution while we're off running around destroying ourselves and expending all of our blood in other wars. And Europe is going to collapse, and that will leave Ukraine naked. Ukraine will be left naked and alone. Who's going to rebuild Ukraine? Especially as there's one thing that raises all prices, and that's energy. Energy, energy, energy. Always watch the energy, 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 right? Food, everything, energy, medicine, everything, energy, energy, energy. Energy prices are going up, 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 right? We've got the Groningen gas fields now shut down. We've got Nord Stream interrupted. We've got different things going on, right? We've got the Saudis doing their, and so the bottom line is, at what cost is anybody going to rebuild Ukraine as it gets destroyed and utterly obliterated? And the young men that should be working there, they're dead. They're not even going to make baby Ukrainians. They're just going to be dead, right? And so, I mean, we're destroying Ukraine, and it didn't have to be this way, as Chris Martinson would say. Dr. Chris Martinson, the guy's brilliant. It didn't have to be this way, right? But it is. And the way we were able to rebuild Europe after World War II, partially because energy was really cheap, right? And it was the energy was much lower cost back then, and labor costs were much lower, and materials cost and whatnot. But the energy costs raise all costs, every single cost. I don't see Ukraine being rebuilt. It's a sad joke. I see Europe collapsing. Look at Italy right now, and the so-called conservative prime minister there, right? Look, she's standing up to really sending the Navy out. This is another Abbott kayfabe. It's another joke. It's another Abbott. Abbott's a conservative. He stands up for the Second Amendment. No, he's not. The border's wide open. And these people, and it's not about getting Democratic voters into the United States, right? All that, they're going to kill the Democrats too, right? The Democrats, they think they're getting new voters. And likewise in Italy, they'll send their Navy out. They'll make a big show. Hey, we're repelling it, and then they'll keep coming. And they'll keep coming. And then the Italian government will say, well, we tried, but Germany didn't let us, right?
You raised several good points. One here is that there were conditions in place before all of this happened that significantly weakened the energy policy. That's what made these moves against Ukraine possible, the overall energy policies in Europe, but also in the United States. So that's one strike against us. The fact that all these things are happening simultaneously, we are fighting a multi-front war. We are looking at it as individual pieces of puzzle. Ukraine is an isolated thing. Border policy is an isolated thing. Whereas the people behind this are looking at it as a chessboard with different pieces that they are moving simultaneously. So
that's how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it from that orbital level and down on the ground.
And the third issue is that we are not fighting Russia or China or Islamists or leftists or whoever. We are fighting a coalition of coordinated actors who have all the time in the world, because they're not democracies and they don't think in 4-year terms. They think in centuries, decades and centuries of planning.
Yep.
And they are looking at it strategically, and they are looking how to destroy us methodically by creating this coalition that attacks and exploits corruption and and creates corruption. Where did the corruption in Ukraine come from? From old Soviet issues that were never dealt with, from Russia, from Russian companies and oligarchs, and then it just spread. If you don't fight it right away, which didn't happen after the Soviet Union, it takes root. Where did the corruption in the United States come from? you always have some corruption, but when you don't deal with it, it gets worse. And when you have foreign actors deliberately coming in and corrupting your political circles and your soft power institutions, that's what happens. And same thing in Europe, in Italy. And you give money, you give weapons to Ukraine on the one hand, and you allow Russian money to flow through the banks on the other. So who's really winning here? That's So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Unfortunately, that message does not seem to be getting through to our leaders. Not that we are suffering from a leadership crisis, and whenever we have leaders with some potential, they get we haven't had a good leader in the United States in decades, I would say, and elsewhere.
And we need to. As you say that, it makes me start to think we should stop calling them leaders. We should start calling them, meat puppets or dog kings. That's what they actually are, right? They're not my leader, right? Biden is not my leader. He's not my better. He's not more intelligent. He's not more virtuous. He's not more anything. He's just a piece of meat, sausage stuffed into a suit, right? As is Trudeau, right? As Mark Rutte, as are so many of these others who are just pushing all of us into these things. I trained for 3 years or so when I was in special forces to kill Russians, right? To parachute into Poland. I was in the army for 5 years. 3 of that was training to parachute into Poland to fight Russians, right? Specifically Russians, right? And to side up with Polish and fight Russians, right? And but the thing is I've never hated a single Russian, actually. And but I've always thought, I tell you, I spent a lot of years in communist countries. I spent a lot of years when they were still communist, like East Germany, right? And Romania, when it was still, and that is terrible. I mean, that is absolutely terrible. But what I'm getting to is we've got Ukrainians fighting Russians now, when we should be cooperating. All of us should be cooperating together, right? And yet we've got a great information war. And I get it. Russia has moved into Ukraine, and I get it. That's got historical. I call it a Jurassic trailer park, or the white people Middle East. If you look at U.S. history or European, look at how the borders changed in Europe in the last 1,000 years. They changed like the tides, right? I mean, it's like constantly it's okay, now it's Polish, now it's Ukrainian, now it's Swedish, now it's Turkish, it's like Russian now, it's Soviet. It's always changing. The borders are changing, and so you've got these little pockets of anthro-insulas, human islands that exist that always create areas where outsiders or insiders can use those to create frictions and wars, right? Whether it's Armenians against the Turks, or long list. I mean, thousands of examples, not even hundreds. I mean, it's endless. And that's what's happening now in Ukraine and Russia. You've got your own internal things going on, and then you've got outsiders, us. Well, you're American. I mean, so you're both, right? So we're coming in and we're exploiting this. For whatever reason.
I think there are some people who will capitalize on any crisis. I think with Russia, the motion for invasion of Ukraine has been set decades ago. Kremlin is not a democratic state. It's not a pro-Russian state. It has destroyed Russia from the inside. Russia should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world, with the amount of resources it has, with a sizable population, fairly educated population. Instead, it's suffering and collapsing from internal crisis while Putin moved in to grab resources from somewhere else. That's exactly what he did. Instead of fixing his own backyard, he went somewhere else. And what?
Yeah,
but the problem is, this is what people, they get fixated on Ukraine, but they don't understand that Ukraine is not the end goal. Ukraine is a door. Ukraine is a door to Europe.
Exactly.
And we are seeing that once we showed some weakness on Ukraine in the beginning, guess where? You now have troops in Belarus preparing to attack Lithuania and Poland. We now have, Russian operations all over Europe, in the United States, corrupting our body politics. So it's a war that goes way past Ukraine, and Ukraine is just one block of it, as far as I see.
And you got to keep in mind, again, know your enemy and know yourself. Our military is not the military that I served in, and it's not the military my parents' generation served in, or any of those. It's not that anymore. Now we've got a bunch of LGBT woke people that crash their airplanes and helicopters on a regular basis, right? We got a ship that caught on fire, and destroyed the ship. You know what I mean? Mysteriously. We got LGBT. What's his name? The thing that stole all the classified documents and released them. What's his name? Bradley Manning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all these sorts of things are epic level. Our military we've got all these incredible weapons, but that doesn't matter if you've got a bunch of drug monkeys running. I'm not saying everybody in the military is a drug monkey. That's not true. I have family and friends in the military, and some of them are deadly serious people, right? But then they're being selected against, right? They're being selected against. And the same with the Canadian and the British militaries, right? Studs are being selected against, right? And that's what you need to fight is studs. We're draining out our blood and our treasure on so many different things. As these aliens come across the U.S. border, we're giving them $2,200 each per month each, whereas Americans on Social Security maybe $1,400 a month, right? So we're giving millions of people per year are coming in at this point, millions per year, right? And we're giving them $2,200 a month each as they overwhelm places like New York, so we're being destroyed. Europe is being destroyed, and they're saying, "Hey, let's go have a war in Ukraine," and it's weakening us. And Ukraine and everything will collapse.
It's an amazingly wealthy country. It should, thankfully, we do not have any forces in Ukraine. The money we spent is a fraction of our budget, but what have we mismanaged? By not giving enough ammunition early on to put an end to it before it even got started, we found ourselves in a drawn-out spectacle where the more time passes, the more Russia has time to infiltrate and expand its operations beyond Ukraine. That's the problem that no one's talking about. The fact that the more time passes, the more time Russia spends in Europe, the more access it has to Europe and beyond its own borders. So, first of all, this should never have been allowed to pass.
But we knew it would happen. We knew it would happen because, again, know yourself. I saw what happened in Afghanistan.
Our so-called leadership, took deliberate action to allow this to happen, and now we're stuck in the situation. There is no going back from the situation, actually.
No,
because the damage has
the fires are burning. Much of Ukraine is
and Russia is already having operations in Poland, in Czechia, all over Eastern and Central Europe, and far beyond that. It's the ship has sailed. So whoever thought that this could be stopped, now you could just mitigate the damage and try to put an end to these military operations, to this cognitive warfare as soon as possible. But again, we are not reading the situation. We are not seeing that what you said in the beginning, the cognitive warfare is the essence of the war. That is the real battle we are fighting. That is the real battle we are fighting, and China is in it 100%, and we are seeing this migration flow, these China camps, as exactly part of the problem. People see it's an either-or obstacle. No, border security is a basic issue. Has nothing to do with foreign policy. It's the same thing as basic economy. It's basic hygiene. It's like brushing your teeth. You take care of that separately, aside from, you have to be able to walk and breathe at the same time. It's not blink and breathe, eat and breathe. These are two essential issues. You have to be able to manage outside threats like the Russians and inside threats such as the border, because at the end of the day, the same people are behind both. The problem is our mismanagement. It's not that we are funding Ukraine, is that we are mismanaging everything we do. We're not handling anything correct. We're not handling border. We're not handling immigration. Immigration policy is a strategy. The correct strategy is to bring in people who can help make our country stronger, and who can be used to fortify us against outside threats. Strategically bring in immigration in a healthy, normal way, and prevent violation of our laws by strengthening our borders. That's what we should be doing. We should not be spending trillions of dollars on speculative climate change projects and Inflation Reduction Acts that only create inflation. We should not be waiting for the Russians, to step in before cutting them off. We should be, imposing sanctions that projects that we know will lead to an invasion. We should be making it very clear that any physical incursion will be met with overwhelming and deadly force. And then, then we send strategic communications to all these entities that we're not going to put up with it. Instead, we're doing exactly the opposite, and then everything gets out of control. That's exactly to be expected, and that's exactly what all these people are exploiting.
That's what they're trying to do. It's all part of the, as you see, you're looking at this at a high level. You're looking at it, you see these open borders and the destruction of Europe and the energy issues in Ukraine. It's all part of a larger war. And again, know thyself, and thyself, our system now has terminal cancer. There's no way out of this without severe bloodshed in Europe and the United States. It's on. One way or the other, there's going to be severe bloodshed. Now, Europeans may get out the other side, in tatters and survive, and Europe survives, or they may just be taken over. It may become a caliphate, part of a caliphate. Literally, that's the direction we're heading.
Well, unless
it could become part of China, because remember, biological warfare. I'm going to have some coffee if you don't mind, because biological warfare is actually, reaching a higher and higher level. Our enemies like the Chinese and not just them, but within our own borders are quite serious on biological warfare. Whether it's injecting people with jabs that are clearly causing infertility and killing people. This is a complex war, and the Muslims get a lot of wisdom from them. One of them is that first you fight the near enemy, right? Mm-hmm. And actually, that's one of the first things you learn as a soldier when you're only 18. When you're in a war, who do you fight first? And there's a lot of people coming at you. You shoot the ones closest to you, right?
Sure,
the Muslims call that the near enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just wise, right? And it's the near enemy is the one leaving our borders wide open, is the ones that are just destroying the United States from within. But Ukraine has zero chance when Europe and the United States collapse. Ukraine is just a piece of fruit left out on the field.
The problem is this border policy has predated Ukraine by a long time, and it's been an ongoing issue, and it's something that can be simply stopped at any moment.
Not now. We're way beyond that. We've brought in tens of millions of people into Europe and the United States that are incompatible as our economy collapses. We're way beyond just closing the border. At this point, anything short of mass deportation, and you're in for a really profound change in the way you live. And I mean a lot of violence. Look at the violence going up now. Again, I'm somebody who's lived 3/4 of my life outside of the United States, and I'm constantly in these other countries, right? Mm-hmm. And I've learned a few things. For instance, some fish don't mix well in the same aquarium. Mm-hmm. Now, Ukrainians and Americans of many sorts, we can mix quite well, because we intermarry, and the next thing you know, we have babies together, and we're the same family, right? Then you've got other people that come in as literally as tribes, right? Mm-hmm. or as unit, like ethnic units, and they form these human islands.
Or criminal gangs, for that matter.
Oh yeah. But the bulk of Ukraine, of course, Ukrainians bring in their own mafias, and the Italians their own, and the Irish their own. But we do intermarry, and we do then blend.
I am so sorry. I have to run, actually. But thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
How long did we go?
1 second. I got to run.
Okay, I'll talk with you later.
Thank you so much. Bye.